In a stark prison visitation room, beneath harsh fluorescent lights that turned everything the color of bone, a woman in an orange jumpsuit sat motionless on a metal chair, her tattooed arms bare, her breathing shallow, counting down the final moments of her life. Tomorrow she would die, but before the needle found her vein, she made one final request. A request so unusual that it sent ripples of confusion through the entire facility. She didn't ask for a priest. She didn't ask for her family. She didn't ask for a pardon. She asked to see her dog one last time, the only partner who had never betrayed her. Jake, her retired police K9. The prison staff thought it was sentimental, perhaps even dangerous. The guards expected tears and a quiet goodbye. But when the German Shepherd entered the room, something unexpected happened. Instead of comfort, Jake began acting strangely, desperately pawing at the very chair where Hart sat. The officers tensed in alarm. No one could understand what was unfolding before their eyes. Minutes later, a discovery erupted, one that would rock the entire prison system to its core. Stay with us, because this story will leave you breathless. Before we start, welcome to the Fable Room Stories channel. Make sure to hit like and subscribe. And really, I'm curious, where are you watching from? Drop your country name in the comments. The prison stirred awake hours before sunrise, long before the first rays could penetrate the high windows with their steel crosshatch. A thick, suffocating quiet settled over the cell blocks, the kind that only descended on execution mornings. Even the corrections officers, people hardened by years of violence and despair, carried themselves differently today. Their footsteps rang against polished concrete, with a rhythm that sounded like a funeral march. At the end of the women's death row wing sat a figure whose name had once appeared in commendation reports and local newspapers. Her name was Hart Mickey, former K9 officer, former decorated hero, former protector of the innocent. Now just another inmate in state-issued orange, waiting for the final walk to the chamber. But Hart wasn't trembling, she wasn't sobbing, she wasn't writing frantic appeals. She sat perfectly still on the edge of her thin mattress, her tattooed forearms resting on her knees, hands clasped so tightly her knuckles had gone white, as if holding on to something invisible, something no one else could see. The guards monitoring her through the reinforced glass window exchanged troubled looks. "She's too calm," one whispered. "Yeah," the other replied quietly. "That's what worries me." Hart heard their voices through the slot in the door, but she didn't acknowledge them. Her mind had traveled elsewhere, back to a time before the steel bars, before the guilty verdict, before the trial that destroyed everything she'd built, back to when she wore a badge with pride, back to when a German Shepherd named Jake ran beside her through dark alleys and dangerous calls, her partner, her guardian, her only real family. A sharp electronic buzz cut through the silence as the main security door unlocked. Every guard in the corridor straightened instinctively. The prison superintendent entered with a tablet in hand, her expression professionally neutral. Behind her walked the prison chaplain and a crisis counselor, standard protocol for the final hours. "Hart Mickey," the superintendent announced, her voice clear but not cruel. "You will be transferred to the holding cell adjacent to the execution chamber in approximately 90 minutes. If you have any final requests beyond the one we've already approved, you need to state them now." Hart lifted her head slowly. Her eyes, exhausted, haunted, but somehow still defiant, met the superintendent's gaze directly. "No," she answered, her voice rough from disuse. "Just the one I asked for." The superintendent gave a curt nod. She already knew the request. Everyone in the facility did. It had been discussed in security meetings, debated among staff, questioned by the legal team. Hart's final wish before execution was to see her retired K9 partner one last time. Some guards thought it was pointless. Others found it strange that a woman convicted of murdering a fellow officer would want to see the very animal she'd once commanded in the line of duty. But the request had been granted. Jake had been located, still in service with the K9 unit, and arrangements had been made to transport him to the prison. The superintendent's expression softened, almost imperceptibly. "The transport is en route. You'll see him within the hour. They're setting up the secure visitation room now." Hart's eyes closed briefly. And for just a moment, the mask cracked. single tear traced down her cheek before she caught it with the back of her hand. "Thank you," she whispered. As the officials turned to exit, the guards began their preparations, clearing the corridor, positioning officers at key points, running final security checks. The atmosphere grew denser with each passing minute, the weight of what was coming pressing down on everyone present. Beyond the prison's concrete walls, a K-9 unit vehicle was already pulling through the outer gates, a familiar silhouette visible in the rear compartment. 3 years earlier, the world had been white. Not the sterile white of prison walls, but the violent, blinding white of a January blizzard that had paralyzed the entire county. Snow fell so thick it erased the boundaries between earth and sky, turning every familiar landmark into a ghostly suggestion. Most sensible people had retreated indoors hours ago. But Hart, Mickey, and Jake weren't most people. They moved through the storm like shadows, Hart's breath visible in short bursts, Jake's dark form cutting through snowdrifts that reached his chest. The German shepherd's ears rotated constantly, filtering wind from sound, instinct from information. Hart watched him with the intensity of someone reading a language only 2 souls in the world understood. The call had come in 40 minutes earlier, 6-year-old Maya Rodriguez, missing from her backyard during the first wave of the storm. Initial search teams had found nothing but rapidly disappearing footprints. The weather was deteriorating by the minute. They had maybe an hour before hypothermia became fatal. Jake's head snapped left so sharply that Hart's hand was already moving to her radio before her conscious mind registered the movement. He'd caught something. A scent thread invisible to everyone else, a molecular trail left by terror and innocence cutting through frozen air. "Go," Hart whispered, and Jake surged forward. They ran together through the skeletal forest behind the subdivision, Hart's boots finding purchase where Jake's paws had already tested the ground. She didn't question his direction. 3 years of partnership had built a communication that transcended commands. When Jake's ears flattened, Hart knew to slow down. When his tail stiffened, danger was close. When he glanced back at her with those amber eyes, he was asking permission to do what he'd been born to do. She gave it with a single nod. The trail led to an abandoned hunting cabin, nearly invisible beneath accumulated snow. Jake's body language shifted from pursuit to alert, head low, muscles coiled, a soft growl building in his chest. Hart drew her weapon, moved to the splintered door, and kicked it open in one fluid motion. Inside, huddled in the corner beneath a pile of moth-eaten blankets, was Maya Rodriguez. Her lips were blue, her small body shaking violently, and standing over her, wild-eyed and reeking of alcohol and desperation, was Dennis Crawford, a registered offender who'd violated parole 6 months earlier. What happened next took less than 30 seconds but would be replayed in Hart's mind for years. Crawford lunged for the child. Jake launched himself between them with a snarl that sounded like tearing metal. Hart moved around the confrontation, scooped Maya into her arms, and backed toward the door while Jake held Crawford pinned against the wall, teeth bared, daring the man to move. By the time backup arrived, Maya was wrapped in Hart's coat, crying but alive. Crawford was face down in the snow with Jake standing over him like a sentinel. And Hart was kneeling beside the little girl, her tattooed hands, inked with badges and memorial dates for officers who died in the line of duty, gently brushing snow from Maya's hair. The paramedics called it a miracle. The other officers called it exceptional police work. But Hart knew the truth as she watched Jake accept scratches from the grateful parents, his tail wagging despite the exhaustion in his eyes. It wasn't luck. It wasn't training. It was something deeper than either. It was the bond between 2 broken souls who'd found purpose in protecting others. Jake had been a rescue, deemed too aggressive for civilian life. Hart had been a kid from the system, raised in foster homes, told she'd never amount to anything. Together, they'd saved a life. Looking back now from her death row cell, Hart understood that day had been the beginning of the end. Because when you shine too bright in a corrupt system, someone always tries to extinguish your light. The prison looked different at night. Hart had walked these corridors dozens of times during her preparation, but now, wearing the crisp Navy uniform of a corrections officer instead of her K-9 unit blues, Everything felt wrong. The badge clipped to her belt was temporary. The name on it wasn't hers. Even her weapon felt foreign in its holster, a standard-issue Glock replacing her familiar service pistol, which waited locked in evidence storage as part of her cover. Jake had been left behind at the K-9 facility for this assignment. The separation made her feel naked, vulnerable. For 3 months, she'd been building this cover, earning trust, watching, waiting, and tonight, finally, the pieces were coming together. Officer Ramon Santos walked 3 paces ahead of her, his posture casual but his shoulders tight with tension. He was the only person in the entire operation who knew who Hart really was, her handler, her lifeline, the detective who'd recruited her when Internal Affairs first caught wind of something rotten in the state's largest correctional facility. Loading dock, midnight, Santos had whispered during the shift change. Cross will be there. This is it. Now, at 11:47, they moved through the administrative wing toward the service areas where deliveries came in. The corridors here were older, cameras fewer, lighting inconsistent, perfect for activities that needed to stay invisible. Hart's radio crackled softly. Santos touched his earpiece, listened, then glanced back at her with a subtle nod. They were clear to proceed. The loading dock was a cavernous space that smelled of diesel fuel and concrete dust. Security lighting cast long shadows between stacked pallets and idle forklifts. Hart positioned herself behind a support column where she could see but remain hidden, her hand near her weapon, her phone set to record in her pocket. At precisely midnight, a door opened at the far end of the dock. Warden Victoria Cross emerged, her usually immaculate appearance slightly disheveled, her movements quick and purposeful. She was followed by 2 men Hart didn't recognize, civilians in expensive coats, faces hard with the kind of confidence that came from never facing consequences. Hart's pulse quickened. She glanced toward Santos, who'd taken position near the main entrance. His eyes were locked on the meeting, his hand already reaching for his radio to call in the backup team waiting 3 blocks away. The conversation was too distant to hear clearly, but Hart caught fragments: packages, distribution, payment. Their stories were detailed, consistent, damning. Webb tried to establish they were lying to reduce their own sentences, but Vance presented documentation showing none of them had pending charges or deals in negotiation. They had nothing to gain from testifying. Except that was a lie, too. Hart knew it. But knowing and proving were oceans apart. The moment that broke Hart came during the 3rd week. The prosecution requested Jake be brought to court to demonstrate Hart's capacity for violence and control through intimidation. The K-9 was led into the courtroom on a heavy chain, his eyes immediately finding Hart. When Warden Cross entered to testify, Jake erupted. He lunged across the gallery with such force that 2 handlers could barely restrain him, his snarls echoing off the marble walls. Cross stepped back dramatically, playing the frightened victim perfectly. Judge Reeves's gavel cracked like thunder. "Remove that animal immediately. It is barred from these proceedings." Hart watched Jake being dragged away, his eyes never leaving hers, and something inside her shattered. They'd taken everything: her freedom, her reputation, her truth. Now they were taking the only family she had left. Webb rested the defense without calling Hart to testify. He claimed it was strategy. Hart knew it was surrender. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. Guilty on all counts. First-degree murder, conspiracy, corruption. Judge Reeves showed no mercy at sentencing. "You betrayed your oath, Officer Mickey. You betrayed a brother in arms. The court sentences you to death by lethal injection." The gavel fell like a guillotine blade. Death row had a smell Hart could never quite name. It wasn't just the industrial cleaner or the recycled air or the bodies pressed too close together in cells designed for isolation. It was something deeper, the scent of time stopping, of futures being erased one breath at a time. 6 months into her sentence, Hart had learned the rhythm of this place. Wake at 5 when the lights buzzed on with mechanical indifference. Breakfast through a slot at 6. 1 hour of recreation in a cage barely larger than her cell. The rest was waiting, an endless expanse of hours where the only thing to do was count the days disappearing behind you and the terrifyingly few remaining ahead. The appeals came and went like seasons she could no longer see. Her first appeal was denied in March. The decision arrived on a Tuesday, delivered by a guard who wouldn't meet her eyes. Webb had argued ineffective counsel at trial, a legal maneuver that basically meant admitting he'd failed her. The appellate court disagreed. The conviction stood. The second appeal died in May. This time, Webb challenged the admissibility of her juvenile record, the mysterious appearance of evidence that should have been sealed. The state's attorney general responded with a brief so comprehensive it felt like overkill. Denied. By the third appeal in July, Hart had stopped reading the legal documents Webb sent. She knew how they'd end. The system wasn't designed to catch its mistakes. It was designed to run forward like a machine, crushing everything in its path until the final switch was thrown. The only thing that kept her breathing through those months was knowing Jake was still out there. The K-9 unit had taken him back after the trial. She imagined him on patrol with a new handler, doing the work he was born for, living a life that didn't include the stain of her conviction. That fantasy shattered on a Wednesday in August. The chaplain came to her cell mid-afternoon, his face carrying the particular expression people wore when delivering news that would destroy you. He held a letter from the K-9 unit administrator, and Hart's hands shook as she took it. "Officer Mickey, it is with regret that we inform you K-9 Jake, badge number 847, has been removed from active duty due to behavioral issues stemming from handler separation trauma. Multiple rehabilitation attempts have failed. Per department policy, animals deemed unadoptable and unsuitable for service must be humanely euthanized. The procedure is scheduled for August 23rd. Hart read the date 3 times before its significance registered. August 23rd, 2 days after her execution date of August 21st. They were going to kill her, and then they were going to kill the only thing in the world that had ever loved her unconditionally. The cruelty of it was so precise it felt intentional. She imagined Warden Cross somewhere, signing the authorization with that same cold smile she'd worn the night everything fell apart. That night, Hart asked a sympathetic guard for paper and a pencil. She began writing letters she knew would never be delivered. Words meant for eyes that couldn't read them. "Dear Jake, I don't know if dogs understand betrayal the way humans do. I hope you don't. I hope you just think I abandoned you, that I stopped coming home one day for reasons you can't comprehend. That's easier than the truth. That I failed you. Failed to protect myself. Failed to protect us. They're going to tell you I was a bad person. In a way, maybe I was. I bent rules. I trusted the wrong people. I thought I could fix a broken system from the inside. And all I did was get crushed by it. But I was never bad to you. I hope you remember that. I hope you remember the good days. The searches in the snow. The nights you slept at the foot of my bed. The way you always knew when I needed you before I did." The letters grew longer as her execution date approached. She wrote about memories Jake couldn't possibly remember, conversations they'd never had, futures they'd never share. She wrote apologies for things that weren't her fault and confessions for sins she'd never committed. She wrote because it was the only thing left that felt like living. On her final Sunday, a full week before the scheduled execution, Hart finished her 17th letter to Jake. Her hand cramped from writing. Her eyes burned from the fluorescent lights that never truly went dark. At the bottom of the page, she wrote the only truth that still mattered. "I would have died for you 1,000 times. I'm sorry I only get to do it once." She folded the letter with the others, a stack of paper that would likely be thrown away the moment her cell was cleaned out. Love letters to a dog who would die, not understanding why his human never came back. The guard who collected her dinner tray that night noticed her crying for the first time since she'd arrived on death row. He didn't say anything. There was nothing to say. Some grief was too large for words, and everyone in this place knew it. Warden Victoria Cross rarely visited death row. It was beneath her station, a place for guards and chaplains, and the condemned. Her domain was the administrative wing with its polished floors and framed commendations, where power moved through memos and budget approvals rather than through steel bars and countdown clocks. So when word rippled through the corridor that Cross was conducting a facility inspection 48 hours before Hart's execution, every guard straightened their uniform and every inmate fell silent with the instinct of prey sensing a predator nearby. Hart heard the footsteps long before she saw their source. Heels on concrete clicking with the measured rhythm of someone who had all the time in the world and knew it. The sound stopped outside her cell. "Officer Mickey." Cross's voice carried the warmth of a blade wrapped in silk. Or I suppose I should simply say Hart now. The title seems inappropriate given the circumstances. Hart didn't move from where she sat on her bunk, back against the wall, knees drawn up. She'd known this moment would come eventually. Cross wouldn't be able to resist. Predators always returned to admire their kills. The warden stood framed in the cell door's window, impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than Hart had made in a month as an officer. Her silver hair was pulled back in a style that suggested control over everything, even the passage of time. Her smile was the worst part, polite, professional, and utterly devoid of anything human. "I'm conducting my routine pre-execution inspection," Cross continued, consulting a tablet in her hands with theatrical precision. "Ensuring all protocols are being followed. We take the dignity and rights of the condemned very seriously, as I'm sure you can appreciate." Hart finally met her eyes. They were blue and empty as a winter sky. "Of course, these situations are always tragic," Cross said, her tone perfectly calibrated to sound like regret. "When officers entrusted with upholding the law choose instead to violate it, the betrayal of that sacred trust." She shook her head with practiced sorrow. "It damages the entire profession." A guard shifted uncomfortably at the end of the corridor, pretending not to listen. Cross took a small step closer to the bars. "I've been giving interviews, you know, about the importance of proper screening and psychological evaluation for law enforcement candidates. Some people, despite their training, despite opportunities for redemption, simply have darkness inside them that can't be reformed." Her eyes glittered with something that might have been pleasure. "Troubled backgrounds, history of violence. These patterns have a way of resurfacing, don't they?" Hart's jaw clenched. Every word was chosen carefully, designed to wound while maintaining plausible deniability. Cross wasn't confessing. She was gloating in a language only the two of them truly understood. "I understand you requested to see your dog," Cross continued, her smile widening fractionally. "How touching. The department is accommodating that request as a gesture of humanity, though I personally questioned the wisdom. Animals can be so unpredictable, especially when separated from their handlers for extended periods. Still, I suppose a brief reunion before—" She let the sentence trail off, the unfinished thought hanging in the air like smoke. "Before we kill you both," Hart heard in the silence. Cross consulted her tablet again. "Everything appears to be in order. The execution chamber has been prepared. The witnesses have been confirmed. The medical team is standing by. All very humane, very professional. We've learned from past mistakes in these matters." She looked up, and for just a moment, the mask slipped enough for Hart to see the truth beneath. "We don't leave loose ends anymore." The words landed like a physical blow. Cross was telling her that this time, there would be no evidence left behind, no trails to follow, no possibility of posthumous exoneration. Hart would die. Jake would die. And the smuggling operation would continue without interruption. "I do want you to know," Cross said, her voice dropping to something almost intimate, "that I hold no personal animosity toward you, Hart. You were simply in the wrong place at the wrong time. A casualty of circumstances beyond your control." She paused, savoring the moment. "Sometimes the system works exactly as intended, protecting itself from those who would threaten its stability. You understand, don't you? It's nothing personal." But her eyes said otherwise. This was deeply, profoundly personal. This was a woman who had built an empire on corruption and crushed anyone who threatened to expose it. And she wanted Hart to die, knowing she'd won completely. Cross stepped back from the cell, her professional demeanor sliding back into place like armor. "I'll leave you to your final preparations. I understand the chaplain will be by this evening if you'd like to make peace with your maker." The smile returned, cold and perfect. "Though I suspect forgiveness may be difficult to obtain given the nature of your crimes." She turned to leave, heels clicking against concrete once more. "Warden," Hart called out, her voice rough but steady. Cross paused, glancing back with one eyebrow raised in question. "You're right about one thing," Hart said quietly. "The system does protect itself, but sometimes it protects the wrong people, and sometimes that catches up with you." For a brief flicker, something like uncertainty crossed Cross's face. Then it was gone, replaced by that same glacial smile. "Goodbye, Hart. I doubt we'll speak again." The footsteps receded down the corridor, growing fainter until they disappeared entirely. Hart sat in the silence that followed, her heart pounding, her hands shaking with rage she had nowhere to direct. 2 days. She had 2 days left to exist in a world where Victoria Cross walked free while she waited to die for crimes she didn't commit. The injustice of it should have destroyed her. Instead, it crystallized into something harder, sharper. Cross had made a mistake coming here. She'd shown her hand, revealed the depth of her involvement through the very act of denying it. Hart didn't know how, didn't know if it was even possible, but she made herself a promise in that moment. If there was any chance, any possibility of the truth coming out, she would find it, even if she had to do it from beyond the grave. The final morning arrived with the same indifferent fluorescent dawn as every other, but the weight of it pressed down differently. Hart had imagined this day 1,000 times during the past 6 months, each version a fresh horror. Now that it was here, she felt strangely hollow, as if her body had already begun the process of becoming a memory. The breakfast tray came at 6. Eggs, toast, something that might have been oatmeal. Standard issue, identical to every other morning, except for the small printed card placed beside it. Last meal request form. Must be submitted by 0800 hours. Hart pushed the tray back through the slot without touching it. At 7:30, the chaplain arrived, his Bible worn soft from years of these visits. "Would you like to pray together, Hart?" "No," she said quietly. "But thank you." At 8, the superintendent appeared with her tablet and formal expression, flanked by 2 senior guards and the prison physician who would pronounce her dead in approximately 6 hours. "Hart Mickey, do you have a last meal request?" Hart stood, her orange jumpsuit hanging looser than it had 6 months ago. She'd lost weight that didn't exist to lose. Her tattooed arms looked skeletal in the harsh light. "No meal," she said. "I want 20 minutes with my dog." The superintendent's professional mask slipped for just a moment. "I'm sorry?" "My canine partner, Jake. I want to see him. 20 minutes, that's all I'm asking." The request created exactly the chaos Hart expected. The superintendent made calls. Legal reviewed precedent. Security raised concerns about safety protocols and liability. The prison physician questioned the psychological impact. For 90 minutes, Hart's final request bounced through the bureaucratic machine, grinding against policies that had never contemplated a scenario quite like this. Then Captain Marcus Rivera made a call that changed everything. Rivera had worked with Hart 5 years earlier, before her undercover assignment back when she was just another K-9 officer doing exceptional work. He'd written one of her commendations after the Maya Rodriguez rescue. He didn't believe she was guilty, had said as much publicly, destroying his own career prospects in the process. Whatever strings he pulled, whatever favors he called in, it worked. At 10:45, the superintendent returned to Hart's cell. "Your request is approved. 20 minutes supervised in the secure visitation room. The K-9 unit is transporting the animal now." Hart's knees nearly buckled. "Thank you," she whispered. They moved her at 11, shackled hand and foot, through corridors emptied of other inmates. The visitation room was small and institutional. Walls painted the color of despair, a single metal chair bolted to the floor in the center. 2 guards positioned themselves by the door, their expressions unreadable. Hart sat in the chair because standing was no longer possible. Her whole body trembled. 6 months of grief, rage, and resignation condensed into this single moment. She was going to see Jake one last time. It was a gift she didn't deserve and couldn't bear, and desperately needed all at once. The door at the far end of the room opened. Jake appeared first, led by a handler Hart didn't recognize. The German Shepherd wore a muzzle, a heavy tactical collar, and a lead designed for containment rather than partnership. But none of that mattered the instant his eyes found hers. He'd lost weight too. His coat lacked the shine she remembered. His eyes carried a haunted quality that mirrored her own, the look of something broken, that had forgotten how to heal. For one suspended heartbeat, neither of them moved. Then Jake made a sound Hart had never heard from him before. A whine that started deep in his chest and climbed into something almost like a human cry. His entire body began to shake, pulling against the restraints with such force the handler struggled to maintain control. "Let him go," Hart heard herself say. The handler looked to the guards. The guards looked to each other. Some unspoken communication passed between them. "You've got 15 minutes, one guard said. "Any sign of aggression, we're pulling him out." The handler removed Jake's muzzle and unclipped the lead. Jake didn't run. He moved across that space like something wounded, head low, each step tentative as if he couldn't trust what he was seeing. When he reached Hart, he pressed his head against her shackled hands, and the sound he made broke something in everyone watching. Hart slid from the chair to the floor, her chains rattling. She wrapped her arms around Jake's neck and felt him collapse against her. 70 pounds of muscle and loyalty and grief that matched her own. "I'm sorry," she whispered into his fur. "I'm so sorry, boy. I'm so sorry I couldn't protect you. I'm sorry I couldn't protect us." Jake's tail didn't wag. He just pressed closer, as if trying to merge their bodies, to undo the 6 months of separation through sheer physical proximity. The guards looked away. Hart held her partner and let herself cry for the first time since the verdict. She told him she loved him, told him to be good for whatever came next, told him none of this was his fault. She told him goodbye. For the first few minutes, Jake simply existed in Hart's arms. His body pressed against hers with the desperate intensity of something trying to memorize through touch what memory might forget. His breathing came in shudders. His eyes never left her face. Hart stroked his head, ran her fingers through his coat, whispered the same words over and over like a prayer that might undo everything. "I love you. I'm sorry. I love you. I'm sorry." The guards maintained their positions by the door, but Hart could feel their discomfort. This wasn't how these final visits usually went. There was too much raw emotion in the room, too much proof that the person they were about to execute was capable of love this pure. "You're going to be okay," Hart whispered, though she knew it was a lie. Jake wouldn't be okay. Neither of them would. "Someone's going to take care of you, someone good. You're going to—" Jake pulled away. The movement was subtle at first, just a slight tension in his shoulders, his head lifting from where it rested against her chest. Hart felt the shift immediately, the way his breathing changed, his focus redirecting to something beyond their reunion. "Jake?" Her hands were still on him, but he was no longer present in the same way. Something had changed. He stood, took 2 steps back, and looked at her with an expression Hart had seen 1,000 times before. It was his working face, the one he wore when instinct overrode everything else. Then he turned toward the metal chair, bolted to the floor. "What is it, boy?" Hart asked, her voice catching. Jake began to circle the chair, his movements precise and deliberate. His nose worked the air, processing information invisible to everyone else in the room. This wasn't random. This wasn't grief making him restless. This was alert behavior. Hart's breath caught in her throat. She'd seen this exact sequence hundreds of times during their years together. The circling, the focused attention, the way his entire body aligned toward a specific target. "Jake, what did you find?" One of the guards shifted by the door. "Is he okay? Should we—" Jake's paw came down hard on the chair's base, a sharp, deliberate strike. He barked once, not the sound of distress, but a clear, commanding alert. Then he sat, rigid and formal, his eyes locked on the point where the chair's metal leg met the floor. It was the formal alert position, the one he used for narcotics detection, for explosives, for evidence. Hart's heart began to pound. She pushed herself up from the floor, her shackles clanking, and moved toward the chair. "What is it? What's there?" Jake didn't move from his position, but his eyes followed her, tracking her approach with laser focus. His tail remained still. Everything about his posture screamed the same message. "I found something. Pay attention." "Ma'am, you need to step back," one of the guards said, moving forward. "No, wait." Hart's voice carried an authority she hadn't felt in months. He's alerting. He's trained for detection. There's something here. The other guard, older and wearing the insignia of a former K-9 unit officer, stepped closer. He studied Jake's position, his alert posture, the precision of where he was focused. Jesus, the older guard muttered. He's right. That's a textbook alert. For what? The younger guard asked. I don't know, but that dog isn't playing. There's something under or in that chair. Hart dropped to her knees, ignoring the bite of shackles against her ankles. She ran her hands along the chair's base, feeling for anything unusual. The metal was cold and smooth. Standard prison furniture bolted to prevent it being used as a weapon. But Jake's eyes never wavered from one specific point. Here, Hart said, her fingers finding something. A slight irregularity in the weld where the chair leg met the base. There's something. Step away from the chair, Mickey. The younger guard's hand moved to his radio. No, listen to me. Hart's voice cracked with urgency. Jake doesn't make mistakes. If he's alerting, there's evidence here. Something hidden. Something someone didn't want found. The older guard knelt beside her, professional curiosity overriding protocol. He examined the spot Jake had indicated, pulled a small flashlight from his belt, and angled it beneath the chair's base. His expression changed instantly. There's something here, he said quietly. Looks like a magnetic case, the kind people use to hide spare keys on their cars. Hart's whole body went cold. The visitation room, the chair. Warden Cross had been here 2 days ago, standing exactly where Hart now knelt, conducting her inspection. She'd hidden something incriminating, something she'd wanted close but concealed, probably planning to retrieve it after the execution when the room would be empty and unwatched. And Jake, following instincts honed through years of training, had found it. We need to get that case, Hart said, her voice shaking. We need to see what's inside. The younger guard was already on his radio. Supervisor to visitation room, immediate. We have a situation. Jake remained in position, his job complete, his alert maintained. He looked at Hart with those amber eyes, and she saw something in them she hadn't seen in months. Purpose. The reason they'd been partners in the first place. He'd found what she couldn't. He'd done what he was born to do. He'd saved her one more time. The magnetic case was smaller than a deck of cards, black metal that blended perfectly with the chair's underside. The older guard, his nameplate read Morrison, worked it free with careful precision, his hands steady despite the magnitude of what was unfolding. Everybody stay calm, Morrison said, though his voice carried an edge Hart had never heard from a guard before. This wasn't procedure. This was something breaking open in real time. The younger guard hovered by his radio. Sir, the execution is scheduled for 1300 hours. That's 90 minutes from now. Whatever this is, I know what time it is, Davies, Morrison snapped. He held the case up to the light, examining it from every angle. This wasn't here by accident. Someone hid this deliberately. Hart remained on her knees, Jake pressed against her side, both of them watching Morrison's hands with an intensity that made the air feel electric. Everything, her life, Jake's life, the truth, balanced on what was inside that small black box. Morrison pried the case open. Inside, nestled in foam padding, was a microchip no larger than a fingernail, the kind used for data storage, for information someone needed to keep secure and hidden. What is that? Davies asked. Evidence, Hart breathed. It has to be evidence. Morrison's jaw tightened. He looked at Hart, and she saw the war playing out behind his eyes. Protocol versus conscience. Career versus justice. This needs to go through proper channels. Evidence chain, legal review. There's no time for channels, Hart interrupted, her voice raw with desperation. I'm supposed to die in 90 minutes. If there's anything on that chip that proves I'm innocent, we need to know now. We don't even have equipment to read it, Davies said. This requires specialized. Morrison was already on his radio, but not calling his supervisor. This is Officer Morrison. Badge 2847. I need to speak to Captain Rivera immediately. Tell him it's about the Mickey case and it's urgent. The next 20 minutes moved with the frantic energy of a bomb countdown. Rivera arrived within 5 minutes, took one look at the microchip, and made a decision that would either save his career or destroy it. "Get me the FBI," he said. The task force that had originally investigated the prison smuggling ring was based 40 minutes away. Special Agent Chen, who'd worked the case before jurisdiction got murky and the investigation stalled, answered on the second ring. "You're telling me you found a data chip hidden in a death row visitation room 90 minutes before an execution?" Chen's voice crackled through the speakerphone with disbelief. "That's exactly what I'm telling you," Rivera said. "And I'm telling you the condemned officer's K9 found it. The same K9 that's trained for evidence detection." A pause. Then, "Don't let anyone touch that chip. We're en route. I'm bringing our digital forensics unit." The wait was agony. Hart was moved back to her cell but kept under special watch. Jake was held in a secure area rather than being returned to the K9 facility. The clock ticked forward with mechanical indifference. 12:15, 12:30, 12:45. The FBI convoy arrived at 12:52, 8 minutes before Hart was scheduled to be transferred to the execution chamber. Agent Chen was a woman in her 50s with gray-streaked hair and eyes that had seen too many cases go wrong. She examined the chip, the magnetic case, the chair, and Jake, who'd been brought back to demonstrate his alert behavior. "This is highly irregular," she said, but her tone suggested she was already convinced. Her forensic specialist, a young man with nervous hands and 3 laptops, went to work immediately. The chip was encrypted, but not with anything sophisticated. Whoever hid it had prioritized concealment over digital security. The files opened at 1:07 p.m. Hart should have been dead by then. Instead, she stood in a conference room surrounded by FBI agents, guards, and Captain Rivera, watching her life reconstruct itself on a laptop screen. The chip contained communications, encrypted messages between Warden Cross and a network of contacts, suppliers, dealers, corrupt corrections officers. The dates ranged back 2 years, a comprehensive record of the smuggling operation. But it was the messages from the night Officer Santos died that changed everything. Timestamp 23:47 hours, cross to an unknown contact. "The cop is getting too close. Santos has to go. Make it look like Mickey did it. Her weapon is in evidence storage, C block. Planted at the scene." Timestamp 23:52 hours. Unknown contact. Confirmed. Mickey will be unconscious for at least 20 minutes. Plenty of time to stage it. Timestamp 00:14 hours. Cross. Is it done? Timestamp 0:16 hours. Unknown contact. Santos is down. Mickey's weapon on scene. She's in custody. It's clean. Agent Chen read the messages aloud, her voice steady but her hands shaking slightly. The timestamps prove Hart was unconscious when these communications were sent. She couldn't have been involved in planning Santos's murder because she was the one being framed. Rivera's radio squawked. "Sir, it's 1:10. The execution chamber is ready. The witnesses are assembled. What do we—" "Shut it down," Rivera said. "Shut everything down, now." Agent Chen was already on her phone. "This is Special Agent Chen, FBI. I need an emergency stay of execution for inmate Hart Mickey. We have new evidence proving actual innocence. Get me the governor's office. I don't care who you have to wake up." Hart's legs gave out. She sank into a chair, Jake immediately at her side, and for the first time in 6 months, she let herself believe she might actually survive this. The call from the governor's office came at 1:32 p.m., 40 minutes before Hart's scheduled execution. Agent Chen answered on speaker, and the entire room fell silent as the governor's legal counsel delivered the words that rewrote reality. "Executive stay of execution granted, effective immediately. The case is being remanded for emergency review based on newly discovered evidence of actual innocence." In the execution chamber, 3 floors below, the medical team stood beside a gurney that would remain empty. The witnesses assembled in the observation room were quietly dismissed. The machinery of death, already humming with preparation, fell silent. Hart was moved from death row that same afternoon, though not to freedom, not yet. Protective custody in a secure wing while the FBI tore apart the case that had nearly killed her. She didn't mind. After 6 months of waiting to die, Waiting to live felt like a gift. The raid on Warden Cross's office happened at dawn the next morning. 15 FBI agents, 3 forensic accountants, and a digital crimes unit descended on the prison like an invading force. They found everything: offshore account records, shipping manifests, ledgers detailing years of smuggling operations that had moved millions in contraband through the facility. Cross's home yielded even more: a safe containing cash, burner phones, and a laptop with unencrypted files she'd apparently thought were secure enough hidden in her private residence. The woman who'd built an empire on careful planning had gotten arrogant, sloppy. She was arrested at her office at 11 a.m., led out in handcuffs past inmates who watched from behind bars with expressions ranging from shock to savage satisfaction. Some of them had been threatened by her. Others had worked for her. All of them understood they were watching power collapse in real time. Cross said nothing as cameras flashed. Her expensive suit and perfect composure couldn't hide the truth anymore. She'd destroyed lives, murdered a good officer, and nearly executed an innocent woman to protect her criminal enterprise. But the dog had found what she'd hidden. The exoneration took 3 months. The legal system moved with unusual speed when embarrassed by its own failures and pressured by media coverage that turned Hart into a national story. Every piece of manufactured evidence was dismantled. Every false testimony recanted under threat of perjury charges. The inmates who'd lied admitted they'd been coerced by Cross's network. Officer Ramon Santos's real killers were identified and arrested. 7 corrupt corrections officers were charged. The smuggling network that had operated for over a decade was systematically destroyed. On a bright November morning, Hart walked out of the courthouse a free woman. The press conference was held on the steps, cameras and reporters packed shoulder to shoulder. Hart stood at the microphone wearing civilian clothes that still felt strange after months of orange jumpsuits. Beside her sat Jake, groomed and healthy again, wearing his K9 badge on a new collar. Captain Rivera stood to her left, promoted now, his faith in her vindicated. Agent Chen stood to her right, the woman who'd believed the evidence even when it seemed impossible. "I'm grateful to everyone who fought for the truth," Hart said, her voice steady, despite the emotion threatening to break through. To Captain Rivera, Agent Chen, the FBI team, and especially to Jake, who did what he was trained to do even when the system failed. Reporters shouted questions, but Hart raised her hand for silence. "I've been offered reinstatement to the police force with full honors and back pay. I'm grateful for that offer." She paused, her hand dropping to Jake's head. "But I'm declining it. Jake and I are retiring from active duty." A murmur rippled through the crowd. "Instead, we're starting something new, Second Chances K9, a program that will train shelter dogs for service work and teach at-risk youth the skills of K9 handling. Because I learned something in those 6 months on death row. The system doesn't just fail people. It fails the abandoned, the forgotten, the ones everyone's given up on." Hart looked down at Jake, who looked back with those amber eyes that had saved her life. "We're going to give second chances to those who need them most, because everyone deserves a partner who believes in them, even when the world doesn't." 3 months later, on a sunny February afternoon, Hart stood in the training yard of Second Chances K9. The facility occupied 5 acres of donated land outside the city, far from prisons and courtrooms and the machinery of justice that had nearly destroyed her. 12 teenagers from the juvenile system worked with 12 rescue dogs pulled from overcrowded shelters. Hart moved among them, offering guidance, demonstrating techniques, watching bonds form between young people and animals who'd both been written off by society. Jake walked beside her, no longer a working K9, but a mentor to the younger dogs, teaching them what Hart taught their handlers: trust, loyalty, purpose. A girl named Maria, 16 with a history of theft and assault charges, knelt beside a scarred pit bull mix named Ranger. The dog had been deemed unadoptable due to fear aggression. The girl had been deemed unrehabable by 3 foster placements. "He's scared," Maria said, her voice soft. "Yeah," Hart agreed, "but so are you. That's why you understand each other." She watched Maria's hand slowly extend, watched Ranger's nose cautiously investigate, watched the moment connection happened, the instant 2 broken things recognized each other and decided to try being whole together. Jake leaned against Hart's leg, his weight familiar and solid. She scratched behind his ears. This dog who'd refused to let her die alone, who'd found evidence hidden in plain sight, who'd saved her in every way that mattered. "We did good, boy," she whispered. The sun was warm, the dogs were learning, the kids were laughing, and Hart Mickey, who'd been condemned to death for crimes she didn't commit, was building something beautiful from the ashes of injustice. She was giving second chances, because she'd been given one herself. Thank you so much for staying with us through Hart and Jake's incredible journey. Their story reminds us that truth has a way of surfacing even in the darkest places, and that loyalty, whether between partners, between handler and K9, or between those who believe in justice, can overcome even the most carefully constructed lies. If this story moved you, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel so you never miss another powerful true story. And we'd love to hear from you in the comments. Where are you watching from today? What part of Hart and Jake's story resonated with you the most? Remember, second chances aren't just given. Sometimes they're fought for, discovered in the most unexpected places, and earned through the unwavering belief that the truth matters. Thank you for watching. Until next time, keep believing in justice, keep fighting for the truth, and never underestimate the power of loyalty. Stay safe out there, and we'll see you in the next story.